Let's talk some chess. This is a beautiful game from chess history. It's often referred to as the Ukrainian Immortal. It was played in Kiev in 1937. The two players are Efim Korchmar with the white pieces and Evsey Poliak with the black pieces. And let's get right into it. White starts off with e4. We have e5 by black, knight to f3, knight to c6, and now bishop to b5. So the Ruy Lopez, a very common opening that we still see today. We have d6 by black, d4 by white, bishop to d7, so blocking the sort of pin of the knight to the king, knight to c3 by white, and knight to f6 by black. So very standard opening, just getting the pieces developed, controlling the center, nothing too crazy so far. And here white castles kingside, just tucking the king to safety. This is the first moment where the game starts to get a little bit strange. Black plays knight takes on d4. The more proposed move by the proposed move by the engine is just putting the bishop on e7. Now you've developed all your pieces, you're preparing to castle, and you can just continue normally. But here, black takes on d4, and this sets off a series of exchanges because you've just opened the tension between the two bishops. So bishop takes on d7 with check, queen takes back, knight takes on d4, pawn takes on d4, queen takes on d4. And now the material is equal, but white has a king that is safely castled, and white has a dark square bishop that can develop to any number of squares, whereas black cannot castle kings. Well, black is not yet castled, and this dark square bishop is not really going to great places. It can only go to e7 for now, so this is a better position for white, and you know, this is why you didn't want to take with a knight on d4. But alas, this is the position we're in, and here we have bishop to e7 by black, developing the piece of the only square it can be developed to, and preparing to castle kingside. And now we have rook to d1 by white. And this is a nice move. It sort of sets the stage for all the tension that's going to be in the middle of the board in this position. White is getting ready to get this e5 move in. We'll talk more about it when it actually happens. So first we have king castling kingside for black. So now both kings are tucked away. It's going to be a struggle for sort of controlling the center. And white kicks off that struggle with e5. So this is a really nice pawn push. It comes with an attack on the knight, and the pawn cannot be captured back by the d6 pawn. So if pawn takes, then we just get queen takes queen, knight takes queen, and rook takes on d7, and this is totally winning for white because you are now just down material. You're down a knight, and that's not going to work. It kind of looks like you have this bishop to d6 move to trap the rook, but then I guess you can't take the rook with anything other than another rook, so you can't, you can only trade material. So you'd be down material if you essentially take the pawn on e5. So of course black does not take the pawn and plays knight to f8, retreating the knight, knight to e8, retreating the knight and adding a protector to the d6 square. But now white is able to develop the bishop to f4, and now there's even more pressure on d6. Pawn, queen, rook, and bishop, and black's position is becoming very cramped. You have these four pieces really not doing much and just desperately trying to defend, whereas white just pushes the pieces forward and gets a lot of space. So black tries to get some space back, sort of tries to get space on the queen side, but also prepares to get the rook into the game via a rook lift. But this allows white to actually start with a rook lift with rook to d3 and getting ready to bring the rook over to the king side and launch an attack against the black king. There's actually a better line for white in this position. Instead of rook to d3, playing rook to e1, because at this point the d pawn is super pinned. If you can't take on e5 because then you just get queen takes queen, and there's no knight anymore on f6 to take the queen back, so that does not work. So instead here black will probably put the queen on c6 to get out of the pin, and now you get knight to d5, and this is a really powerful knight. We're going to see it on this square later in the position, but it's threatening to take the bishop on e7, and not only does it take a bishop, but it royally forks the queen and the king, so that is very strong. The bishop has to move to d8 to protect the e7 square and protect itself, and then you get pawn takes on d6, knight takes on d6, and after c3, this is just way better for white. The rook is controlling the e-file. All these pieces are extremely active and ready to mount an attack against the king, and simultaneously for black, there's not much going on. This bishop isn't doing much. The rooks aren't connected. So just a way better position for white. And I want to show this line because it's kind of similar to the line that we actually end up seeing on the board. So sort of a little preview of something to come. But for now, instead of this rook to e1 move, we get rook to d3, preparing this nice sort of rook slide into the attack. And here, black plays rook to a6. you know, a similar rook lift, trying to get the rook into the game this way. But here you need to play a queen move. I think the engine recommends here queen to e6, getting out of this pin, and then after white brings the rook to e1, then you have this c6 move. And this, you've just achieved two things. You've gotten the queen out of this pin, so this pawn is no longer pinned, and you prevent the knight from coming to d5. So two things that black achieves here. But when you play rook to a6, you only have time for one thing. So here, white brings the rook to e1, which, as we'll see, is going to be a very nice rook when this file opens up. And now the only one thing you can achieve is getting the queen out of harm's way. So the queen moves to f5, getting out of the pin on d7. But you weren't able to get that c6 move in, which would prevent the knight from coming to d5. So white puts the knight on d5. And again, just like we saw on that other line, this is a very powerful knight. It's threatening to take the bishop, which is undefended. And if it successfully takes the bishop, this again forks the king and the queen, and that would be completely game over. So the bishop is forced, just like we saw in the other line, to d8. And it also has to defend this c7 pawn, right? Because the knight is threatening this undefended pawn. Well, not quite undefended. The bishop and the knight are defending it, but you know, just this is a very powerful knight, I guess, is my point. So after this, we finally get this e takes on d6 move. And now the e file is totally opened up for white's rook, and knight takes here on d6. And now, you know, again, similar position to what we saw in the other line, where white's pieces are all super active, controlling a lot of important squares and a lot of important space, whereas these pieces are not doing too much. They're not working together, certainly, and they're not doing too much in defense. I didn't highlight the knight because the knight is a good defensive piece, and it's doing a good job defending the black king, but we'll get to that in a bit. So here we had the move that was previewed earlier, rook to g3, getting the rook on the same file as the king, and now if black falls asleep here and plays something like rook to c6, you get queen takes on g7, and this is checkmate in 1 because the rook is protecting the queen. Of course, black sees this and plays f6, blocking the queen from g7. But now you have the start of a really fun attack, which is bishop to h6. So obviously the rook and the bishop are eyeing g7. Again, if you have a silly move like rook to c6, then you have rook takes on g7 with check, and this just totally does not look like any fun. So instead, black here plays rook to f7, protecting this g7 pawn. And this is a nice move, because I think if I were playing with black pieces in this position, I would be feeling okay. You have the same amount of material. The king is castled, right? And you know there's enough protection on this g7 square. And it's not entirely clear how white is going to continue this attack. And if you're able to withstand this attack, then you can sort of move your forces forward. You can get the rook to c6, you know, preparing to infiltrate along the second rank. The queen is on a good square to attack. Maybe the bishop can get back into the game. So basically, the point here is that the game is sort of hanging in balance. White has this attack going. You also don't want the king to get to h8 because then, you know, the bishop is threatened. So the game's hanging in the balance, and it's hard to sort of find a move that continues the attack here for white. But there is one move. It's a crazy move that sort of kicks off an amazing series of moves that sent this game into, you know, the history books. So see if you can find the proper move here for white while I give you a moment. Okay, so to find the proper move here, you really first have to understand, you know, the idea behind this position. And the main idea is that this rook on the e file is really powerful. And if this rook gets to e8, that would be amazing. So for example, you know, let's just put the rook for now on e8. This is checking the king. It's going to be very tough to block with the rook on f8 because then you free up the g7 square and the rook is coming in, right? So this rook is needed to guard g7, and this is just going to be a disaster for black. The only piece that's preventing this rook to e8 move is the defensive piece I referenced earlier, which is the knight on d6. The knight is guarding the e8 square, right? So white cannot just play rook to e8 because then the knight just takes. So here white is going to kick off a series of moves to remove this knight on d6, and the first move that white plays is the totally nonsensical looking move. Sorry, that's not the totally I jumped the gun. The totally nonsensical looking move, which is knight to b4. And this is just, I mean, if you saw someone play this, you would think their like app had glitched or something. It's like the knight is moving away from the king, It looks like it's retreating, and it's moving back a file, and it's attacked. It's attacked. It's, there's a pawn it can be taken by a pawn. It just doesn't make any sense at all. But this move does come with a threat, right? The knight, even if you don't understand this, rook to e8 threat, it comes with a threat. Like you can take the rook on a6. So for example, what did I want to show here? No. Sorry. I want to show. So if you just make some other move and you don't accept the sacrifice, then you just get knight takes rook, pawn takes knight, and then white is just up the exchange, and this is winning. So you kind of have to accept the sacrifice. So we have pawn takes knight on b4. But now the second idea, so you've just sacrificed the knight. And the whole idea behind sacrificing that knight was to open up the d5 square, a clearance sacrifice to give the queen access to the knight on d6. So now the next move that white plays is queen takes knight on d6. And it's a really crazy series of moves. So one move just, throws the knight away just to open up the d5 square. After the knight's taken, the queen just takes the knight on d6. And the whole idea was to get rid of this knight on d6 to prevent it from protecting this e8 square. So we have queen takes on d6, and this is a sacrifice that cannot be accepted, because if you play pawn takes on d6, then the game is essentially over. You have rook to e8 check, and now the only move is to block with the rook on f8, but now you have rook to g7 check, and this is going to be checkmate after the king runs to h8. You get rook takes rook on f8 checkmate. So the queen is a sacrifice that cannot be accepted. So white tries to sacrifice the queen. Black obviously sees this and does not accept, and brings his queen to d7. So now, looks like a very solid defensive structure. And again, if black can just weather the storm, black is up a knight, or actually no, black's not up a knight anymore. But if black can just weather the storm, maybe you can get some counterplay going, and now you have the queen and the rook are connected on the 7th rank, and more importantly, the black queen is guarding this e8 square. So, maybe this will work. But here you have white plays queen to d5, another queen sacrifice. So, now the black queen can take the white queen, and the whole idea behind this queen to d5 move is you're pinning the rook to the king on f7. So if you play some silly move like rook to actually, is there a move? Yeah, let's do that. Rook to a5, then you just get, this is very, very strong rook to g7, because now the rook is, the rook on f7 is pinned by the queen and can't retake the rook. So that's the idea behind queen to d5. But again, this is not a queen sacrifice that can be accepted. If queen takes queen, then you get rook to e8, and again, this is going to end in checkmate just as before. After you block with the rook and the rook takes on g7, this is disastrous again. So white now has tried to give away the queen on 2 separate occasions, and black is going to reject that sacrifice a second time, and now is going to play king to f8, breaking the pin between the queen and the rook. So now this rook again becomes a viable defensive piece. But here we have, sorry, I didn't want to give that away. So now it's now it's kind of unclear, how to find the proper move for white. Your queen is hanging to the queen, your bishop is hanging to the pawn, because this pawn is no longer pinned. So how do you find, how do you continue this attack for white? If you didn't see it, maybe if you did see it, pretend you didn't see it, and think of how to continue this attack while I give you another second. Okay, if you didn't see it, the next move, and I think this is really, we've seen some great moves. This is the one that puts the cherry on top. It's rook takes on g7. And obviously the idea is getting rid of this pawn, so allowing this bishop to control the attack more. But this is just, again, just an awesome looking move. And it's an awesome looking move because, it looks like it is a sacrifice, right? You're sacrificing a rook. But what happens if the sacrifice is accepted? First of all, what happens if the queen takes, now this queen sacrifice is accepted. Queen takes queen on d5. Well, then you get a rook, and yeah, let me show this one. This one's a little bit more fun. Let's say rook takes rook on g7. Then all of a sudden, this rook on g7 is pinned, right? So the bishop is pinning the rook to the king. So now you get queen takes queen on d7, and the rook cannot take back because it's pinned by the bishop. So now you're just up a ton of material. You have a queen for a rook, and you have an attack going, and this is game over. So There's two sacrifices in this position. The rook is being sacrificed, but we just saw how you cannot take the rook because then you lose your queen. The other sacrifice, once again, is a queen sacrifice, but if you have queen takes queen, then this is, I think, the more fun combination. Then you get just the amazing rook to g8. And this actually was played in the game, so black does accept finally the queen sacrifice. Queen takes queen on d5, and now just the stupendous, incredible rook to g8 with check. And in this position, black resigned the game because now it is just checkmate in a couple moves. The king can move nowhere because the rook on e1, which has just been a monster this whole game, is controlling the e-file. The bishop is obviously checking the king and controlling the g7 square. So the king has to take the rook on g8, but then you get, it's not programmed because it didn't happen, but you would get rook to e8, and this is checkmate, or at least going to lead to checkmate. You have to block with the rook on f8, and now finally this is checkmate after the rook takes on f8, protected by the bishop, and the pawn is blocking the king on h7. So this rook sacrifice on g7 is really the final move in an amazing masterpiece. Can't take the rook, can't take the queen, although the queen, of course, was taken in the game, and we got this final final rook sacrifice on g8 to finish the game. So hopefully you enjoyed that. I mean, just an amazing combination. Basically, white gives away all the pieces to land in a mating picture, which didn't happen, but a couple moves ago, basically to land in this ultimate mating picture where you just have a bishop and a rook, but that's all you need to get the job done. So hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching. Drop a like, drop subscribe, and we'll see you next time.